Yeah, let's do that.
I seem to be
like we're recording.
So I will be Zach and let everybody know that this is the weekly Sig Docs meeting for Kubernetes. Today is Tuesday, November 6th. And take it away,
Go
Zach.
vote.
Go vote.
That too.
Yes. All right, let's start by saying hello to new contributors. So, Robin, is this your first time with us? I can't remember.
Yeah, it is.
Welcome. Hello.
Hey.
Robin just started contributing last week to Sig Docs and has, in that time, submitted and merged a pull request. So, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thanks.
Let's see, Robin. Actually, who are you with? Are you like doing this just out of the goodness of your heart? Are you?
Jared got me started helping.
Awesome. So, are you working somewhere that supports you doing doc works professionally, or?
Not currently, but I'm hoping to get into that sort of thing.
Awesome. Well, that is fantastic. All right, let's move on to updates and reminders. Our PR wrangler this week is Cody Clark still. He's doing 2 weeks back to back. I suspect we'll find him chain smoking with an eye patch at the end of this week, looking very grizzled. But he's doing good work, so yes. One reminder, please test changes for pull requests locally, even if they appear trivial. I will raise my hand and confess that I am the reason for this reminder. I broke the build rather spectacularly last week with a trivial seeming PR. So please make sure to test in your local environment if you have any question about how to do that. I think that our docs, our contributor guide does a pretty good job of telling how to do that, but you can also reach out in Sig Docs Slack and get advice there. Advice that I definitely should have taken.
So quick question on that, Zach. I mean, usually what I do, there's a preview build, right? There's a preview build and you go check the preview build, and if the preview build looks right and they didn't break anything, are you referring to something else?
So I broke something that netlify, it broke something that wouldn't have appeared in the preview build. I was working on a process that's transparent to users. I was adding an owner's file to a particular content directory, and netlify threw an error. I thought I knew why. I recommitted, and it ended up, netlify thankfully is really strict with ownership parsing. It will not build the site if it doesn't fully understand any ownership commands given to it. In this case, there might actually be a Hugo bug involved, but okay. if you're interested, we can sync up later.
I think it did show up in the preview build. Like the preview build wouldn't go through, so you can look at the log and see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was a certain type of PR, not your typical, because your typical PR that's I'm adding a page, editing a page, what have you, you can go look at the preview build and not feel like you have to run it locally. I was just trying to distinguish. It sounds like this was more of an infrastructure type scenario where you really needed to double check it. I was just trying to be a little bit crisp there because I think there's at least two different characteristics. The typical pull request, I think you can just get through with watching the preview, and I just want to make sure I did understand that correctly.
There was one other instance that happened recently. I think Alex was testing out switching from like PNGs to SVG files in the case studies or something. So she removed the file and then it threw an error in the build. So then I guess that got merged accidentally or whatever, but then that caused build problems down the line. But
well,
then,
that means the live preview wouldn't have been built in that case.
Right. It
right.
wouldn't, yeah, the live preview didn't build either.
Right. So I guess one important note about that process is that netlify is not a blocker to the GitHub process. If netlify throws errors, it's not fully integrated as a CI/CD gate check for our PR process. And I had relied mistakenly on the idea that it was. So even if netlify is throwing errors, if one of us were to approve a pull request merging, even if netlify is saying, no, don't do it, for the love of God, no, it will still merge. So that was the piece that was missing for me, is that netlify is not a gate check on our process. It is possible to merge things that netlify does not like at all. So that's why the reminder: test locally or check the preview build. If the preview build, if a preview build isn't available, it's a sign that netlify is not happy. So make sure that netlify is happy before merging a PR.
Okay. Yeah, and for some reason, netlify is not in the test section of the bottom of the PRs anymore. I think somehow that got dropped when we were redoing like the keys and stuff. So.
But there are still, if it builds, it seems to be actually duplicating. So you get 2 comments with the build notification in. And
which I'm not sure why there's that duplicate.
It's in the back of my head to go in and mess around on both sides, GitHub and netlify, but it doesn't seem particularly high priority. Yeah. I wonder though whether putting a bit of additional guidance along these lines would be a good idea, Zach, into the contributor guidelines. So letting people know to double check to make sure that the netlify preview is present. And then if it's not, inviting them to ping on Slack or, otherwise sort of wait for help. And we, maintainers or folks who've been around for longer can step in and try to see what's going wrong.
I think that's a good idea. When we started this, the advice was to build locally, but has the advice morphed to either build locally or check the netlify preview?
Okay. Yes, I have made a note, but that doesn't have to be me that adds that. If there's somebody else who wants to take on that particular piece of guidance, I am more than happy to seed that.
Yeah, but what is the guidance? Is the guidance build locally? Is the guidance check the preview? Is the guidance do one or the other? Or is the guidance do both?
So I think that the guidance is verify that a preview build is available, and that the preview build, that changes in the preview build work as intended.
Okay.
There's a question in chat from Sil. Can't we add it, presumably, can we add netlify to the bot so that it's checked by automation? I think that's one of the questions that we're discussing, Sil, is we set it up to work that way. Now it's not working that way, and none of us are sure why. So yes, we need to go in under the hood and tinker with it and make sure that the webhooks are set up correctly, and that any API events are firing correctly.
Right, it was one of the checks, right? You couldn't do an LGTM approved merge without the netlify preview. So that is, right, in fact, something that bears more urgent attention. Sorry, I kind of leaped over that. Sorry.
No, it's all good. So I think all of us are going a little nuts headed into Shanghai this weekend. I know that Luke Perkins is as well. But I wonder if
this would be proud. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's already in there. We just need to get those hooks back. I am PR Wrangler next week, I believe. And I can try to get to this week, but I don't want to promise. I think I can promise by next week. Only because things are, as some of us were already discussing, a bit chaotic at Heptio, and sometimes I get caught up in the chaos, even when I'd rather be just solving technical problems.
Sure.
So
maybe I can have Netlify add you, Jennifer, to their support channel on Slack. So if you have any questions, you can ask them.
Oh, that would be awesome. I can always do an end run around it because, you know, one of their people is very active on the Write the Docs Slack, but that does not seem quite right. It would be better to do it through the actual official support. That would be great, Andrew.
Yeah, especially since you're like co-chair now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, cool, Jennifer. Thank you for taking that on.
It's the kind of poking around I like to do. I will not undertake to not break things before I fix them, however. Yes, parse those negatives.
All right, let's move on to content updates. I know, actually, yeah. Last week, I know that one of the pieces of feedback we got that the Fun with Modeling talk ended up taking a bit. So I've got this listed first in the agenda. Andrew and Dominic, do you mind if can we shuffle this back just a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. Refactoring the homepage. Andrew, do you want to talk just briefly about that PR and about the work that you're hoping to do there?
Sure. Let me share my screen real quick. Where's the share? Here we go. I think it's this one. All right. Can you see my screen all right? Yep. Yeah. Okay. So there is a PR open right now, but it's mostly to kind of like tinker around and figure out how to do this in Hugo. But the idea is to refactor the homepage. I've been working on a doc that sort of describes this with Cody, and I think I dropped the link in the notes today, but I'll probably also maybe drop it into the PR. So the idea is we want to have like cards kind of similar to TensorFlow tutorials, where they have like these, you know, these sort of sections where, you know, it's a certain area, and then it has some quick links to you know, the important docs for that subject, and then, you know, a call to action button. So similarly, we were thinking of redoing the docs homepage that way, because then the issue, well, what we learned from the user journeys, right, was that there was too many clicks involved for people to get to the content they wanted, the links. So this, I think, is a much more compact way to do it. And the sort of sections that we're proposing are having one that's like, you know, for the get started people, like learning the basics, which is, you know, kind of the task or the concepts, understanding the concepts. Then try Kubernetes, which is related to more of like the tutorials in Minikube. And then sort of the setup stuff, which is like if you want to actually stand up a cluster. And then a section that's on contribute, which would also have both code and documentation. Because I think people coming to the site may not necessarily assume that they're contributing to the docs. And then an area that's like, you know, the production related stuff, like the tasks and the troubleshooting and the reference. You know, so this is kind of what we've just kind of sketched out. So feel free to, you know, give your feedback and suggestions. So this is more, I was hoping to get kind of like a rough working version up in the PR, so we can like take a preview of it and then just be able to talk about it then, and then decide whether we want it or not. But the problem I'm running into right now is that like I wanted to reuse the kind of the partners stuff, because they already have like these boxes, right? But I'm running into some issues with the Hugo templating where I'm not able to reproduce this, because this is like in a different section of the site, like under docs. Like I can't, for some reason I'm having trouble reusing like this template style.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure that out. But that's where I'm at, you know, it's what the effort is in a nutshell.
Cool. That looks awesome. Yeah, I have some thoughts, but will. So just to confirm, the best way to get you feedback about this is to do you want comments in the Google Doc? Do you want comments in the PR? Where is going to be the most helpful mechanism for feedback for you right now?
If it's about the structure, like how we're grouping things and stuff, put it in the Google Doc, because I think that's where most of it's shaping up right now. And then once that's decided, then I'd like any technical things about the actual, PR, the rendering, that sort of thing, that can go into the PR. Well, so the easier way to describe it is once I take the WIP off of the PR, then you can start putting comments there.
Okay, wait until to add comments to PR. Excellent. All right, thank you very much for that update. Let's see, tooling updates. I don't see Luke here. Okay, so no updates from the tooling working group, I guess. Just a note for anyone working on internationalization, specifically on internationalization strings. The PR that I had added to put an owner's file in that directory is failing. That was the reason for the site being hosed over the weekend. So it looks like there might be an actual Hugo bug involved with that. I'm following up with Hugo in their project. So if you're interested in following along with the details, but the takeaway for that is if you are working on internationalization or translating internationalization strings, you'll have to go through the regular English approvers process for final approval and merging of that. So it's a very small window of people who are affected by that change, but just to make sure that that's surfaced. Just a quick note. Now that she has signed her contract, I can say that the CNCF, we've hired Xavi Desindra to be a contractor for us. Xavi came to our doc sprint day at Write the Docs in Cincinnati and contributed very actively to the sprint there. That was how I think Andrew and I met her. And that turned into a conversation, and we've been able to hire her.
Oh, fantastic. She was brilliant.
Yeah, she was awesome. That's great.
So my hope is to get her working on the onboarding journey, and specifically get her working on improving the initial experience for folks who are new to Kubernetes.
Fantastic.
Let's see. Let's save KubeCon chat for the end. For now, let's Dominic and Andrew, if you're ready to talk about modeling, let's go for it.
Sure. So this week we're not going to do fun with modeling, but we wanted to talk about sort of, who we think our audience is. Because last week at the Sig Docs meeting, there was, I think, some discussion around so if we did fold this into the Kubernetes.io website, should we do that? Or is this too advanced? Is this, too complicated or something like that? So, but that kind of, in my mind, begged the question of who do we think our audience is specifically? Because my assumption has been, this is not for just, a new computer science grad, right? People who use Kubernetes, their company needs to scale their operations. It's not just going to be some schmo that's trying to put up a website, because that's way too much overhead for that. So my assumption has been that they have some sort of, computer science or engineering or math background or whatever, and they've been doing this, and this is Kubernetes is an advanced tool that they're using for their organization. So that's why, in my mind, my assumption was this would be helpful to people. But then it seemed that other folks did not necessarily agree with that, or there was some other thing that they were thinking that I wasn't aware of. So I Dominic and I thought it'd be good to just have this discussion here in Sig Docs so that we kind of know who our target audience is for who we're writing for. Does anyone have any thoughts?
You mean for the model related portion specifically, or?
Yeah. So here, let me share my screen again for a second. So for example, wait, this is not the right, hang on, sorry, that's not the right one. Okay, it should be this one. Okay, so like if you look, you know, on Reddit or other areas, right, people often have questions like this one, for example, that Dominic found. Is there a way to specify order of containers to execute, you know, in a pod? And so obviously there's init containers, right? And they can execute in sequence, but they can't all end up running concurrently, right? So that's not what you'd want to use. And so he's, you know, asking like, can you run regular containers in a pod, like start them up in sequence? And the general answer is no, but like he doesn't know this because this isn't really well documented, you know, in our documentation. So I feel like these sort of questions should be able to be answered by just, you know, reading through our docs, and they currently aren't. Another example, which I think we showed before, is on the Kubernetes you know, issues, right? So they asked this question, and Janet had to answer it by pointing him to specific lines of code in you know, in the source code. And and this was, you know, like he was not able to reason about like the, you know, the status of pods after, you know, in a particular situation. So I think our intent was to help to add some documentation that could answer these questions so people could figure this out. But then there seemed to be some pushback on, I don't know, like the diagrams or like how we're describing some of these things, whether that's too detailed or not. And I mean, I think I'd rather have it in the documentation because people don't have to read it, but it's there if they need it, you know? And to me, it's just a more matter of structuring the content. So, you know, maybe we have just like an overview section that doesn't go in all the details, but gives you, you know, a clear idea of like how things work together. And then the standalone topics like pod could then go into, you know, detail of, you know, all the specific, you know, behavior and properties of pods.
Right. So if I play that back to you, Andrew, it sounds like you're saying is if we structured things so that we had a section that says, hey, this is you know, a modeling section where we're going to model some of these characteristics, and we think you're going to find that very valuable and the insights very valuable. And so people understand what they're getting into when they hit that sort of flow through that type of material. Then I think you've done a service because you're saying, listen, I just want to be clear. This is the goal of the modeling section. We think it'll help with X, Y, and Z. And before you get reading into it, well, we kind of gave you a heads up for what this material is going to be for and why it may help, or if you feel like, oh, I should not even bother. That's kind of how I interpreted what you just said.
Well, I wasn't thinking of modeling section specifically because I'm not sure.
Well, whatever you want to call it.
Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't even put it in a section that's like separate from the rest of the documentation per se, right? But in like the conceptual section of the site, we would have an area that's specifically overview, right? So we can talk about a high level about the architecture and what pods are and this and that. So they get a general idea. And then on the standalone topic for pod, for example, then we can add in like, you know, all the details about like the pod phases and like, you know, the unit containers and all this and that are, you know, kind of the material that's in the blog posts that we've been writing. That way, like, you know, if you go to the standalone thing, it still has all the information, and we're not going to specifically call out modeling. It'll just be part of, you know, like,
okay,
how we understand it.
That's more the sprinkled in approach. So there'll be certain parts where instead of, you'll take certain portions of the modeling and then sprinkle it into the main flow, which I think also is fine because someone can look at it and they can either find it helpful or not, but I don't think it causes them pain. that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know. I guess I just want to check in with you guys to see what you thought about, like, if you had thoughts about how we were going to structure, you know, folding this back into the actual docs.
I mean, doesn't that fold into different people learn different ways, and by adding that in, you're providing another mechanism for somebody to grasp the concepts that we're trying to grasp? I mean, that's how I would interpret it.
Yeah.
So, Steve, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with this idea that we want to serve both the beginner and the advanced user. So I think this material that you're working on in the modeling group, I think it's appropriate to have some pages that are for the beginner, and then in the pod topic, it can continue into the advanced view. Dominic, here's a question for you. So it seems to me that often the way you get your insights is you look at the Kubernetes source code itself and see how things work. And I wonder, do you have a sense of when you've crossed the line from what the engineering team wants the contract to be, and when you've drifted into something that's an implementation deal that they might choose to change later?
That is actually a generally a hard task for modeling. What do you actually want to model, right? What level do you pick your abstractions to be? And for example, if you have a message queue in a system, you can have a very high level model that just states that messages will be delivered at least once. Or you can go deeper down the abstraction stack and specify what is the mechanics of the message queue that actually determines, or that actually results in a message being delivered at least once. So that very much depends on the message you want to come across. But in general, when it comes to Kubernetes, I try to model the observable behavior. What are the things that users may see, right? What is the behavior Kubernetes may expose towards a user? And the general idea, and not just to this question, but the general idea how I approach modeling is to give the user a possibility to reason about the behavior of the system. Simple example, if you have a replica set, right, with 3 replicas, for example, and do you think you are safe from one node going down? You have a deployment and you specify rolling update. Do you think you are providing a 0 downtime, right? And there are some intricacies in Kubernetes that actually says no to both of these questions. No, replica set will not guarantee you that if a node goes down and you have 3 replicas, that you're still on, because the replica set doesn't guarantee you that the pods will be scheduled on different nodes. The same with the deployment. If the deployment starts a rolling update and you do not have a liveness probe on the container, the traffic will be routed to this pod immediately after it is ready, which means it is up, but your application may actually not be ready, right? There are a lot of intricacies to how the individual pieces fit together. And I would like to provide clear mental models that help you reason about the system. Like the question Andrew showed on Reddit, right? So the gentleman had a problem in mind and mapped it to a solution. Yet the solution he mapped it to was not directly mappable to Kubernetes. So he didn't specify the problem in detail, so I'm not sure, but maybe there are other Kubernetes native mechanisms he could have mapped it in the problem space in the first place, right? So he wouldn't face any of these problems or any of these questions.
Is this the pod starting in order question you're thinking of?
That was the pod starting in order,
Okay.
exactly. That question should have been a no question.
Uh-huh.
And when I talk about behavior, one more example, which is actually very interesting. Depending on how you set up the API server, whether it is behind a load balancer or not, whether quorum read is activated or not, a consumer of the API server. After creating an object, let's say pod, the consumer creates, or the client creates a pod. The client requests a pod. The pod is not there. The client requests a pod again. The pod is there. The client requests a pod again. The pod is not there. These are possible behaviors you may see in Kubernetes, and that you need to guard your client against that. Right? That is something you need to know, because these edge cases, you will probably not encounter them for quite a while. But I would like to provide models that enable you to reason about this behavior, expect this behavior, and also give you remedying or mitigating actions. How can I actually protect myself from this behavior?
Okay, so it sounds to me like you're confident that you're modeling things that are not simply implementation details that might change. You're modeling fundamental behavior of Kubernetes as it's designed.
Yes.
Yeah.
As it is designed now, of course, the contract may change.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, another example I would say is like etcd, right? Like we were talking to an engineer before, and he's like, "Oh, that's just an implementation detail. Don't look at that." But what we've found is that it's sort of a leaky abstraction that, especially like with high availability and things like that, you need to understand what etcd is actually doing and how it's, you know, organized. So, you know, there is some gray area in terms of like what people think are just implementation versus, you know, but so it's a hard line to draw, but we're trying to figure that out.
So what I'm hearing from folks and reading in chat is that, Andrew, I think there's broad support and broad consensus for the approach that you're proposing. I think that the thinking back to the pushback last week, I think was trying to reconcile the work as it's happening with some of our initial conversations about what modeling could do. And so trying to close the gap between the theoretical and the actual. I think, but no, I agree. I think that the approach that you're proposing works well. I think Brad also had a good sense of scope and clarification, that if you're introducing content that is specifically not for beginning users, that it may be helpful to clarify that, whether that's just with like a short form note that that we reuse as needed, you know, saying that hey, this is more advanced content. If you are a new user, this may not be helpful, but that is an implementation detail that we can skip over. Just you know,
yeah, like at the beginning of the topic, we can have a link back to the overview one. We can do that. Sure.
Just something to set expectations accordingly, so that users don't have to. I say users. It's so that people who are coming to the docs don't have to do that work for themselves, so that we can sort of anticipate that work for them. But otherwise, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Just wanted to sort of check our assumptions and stuff. Thanks.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, that was a really productive discussion. So thank you for that. Let's see. What else do we have? We have so let's talk about Seattle. And let's see. I had an action item from last week to get details about our contributor day. So here's what I've got so far. I've put in the agenda. There's a draft schedule from Sig Contrib-X. So we are currently officially slated for 2 hours, but I talked with Paris last week and again this morning. We can request more time. Requesting 4 hours seems like that is a reasonable amount of time to try and get quarterly planning done in, and sort of get all of the business of our SIG done on a quarterly basis. If we can't do it in more than, if we need more than 4 hours to do this, I would argue that our schedule is maybe a little too ambitious. Does that seem like a reasonable operating assumption?
It does. I actually got word from George, because Heptio, that occupying the space for as much time as we need is just fine. And would we
Awesome.
please do it? Because apparently the space gets yielded to other things if we don't use it. So let's use it.
Okay. So that was going to be my other question, is that trying to reconcile the various discussions about what we're doing in Seattle, it seems to me like we have 2 or 3 different plans for what we're doing with our space and our time. We're talking about doing a doc sprint, which I don't think that we're going to do. I think we're going to focus on quarterly planning, right? If I'm remembering last week's discussion correctly. Okay, so that's something that we need to make clear with Contribex, is that there's not going to be a sprint, that we're just going to use this time for quarterly planning. So there's going to be the, I think we're going to participate in the SIG intro at as that track sort of rolls along. I think that the, different SIGs are scheduled for different intro slots over the course of the whole day. But I think that there's going to be a meet and greet time officially, where we have the chance to sit sort of in the same space, to be in the same community space with other SIGs and say hello to folks and be present for a meet and greet. And I think any and or all of us are welcome to do that for as little or as long as we like. I would like to maintain an active presence for as long as we can there, just to make sure that we're available to say hi to folks. That doesn't have to look like a marathon for any particular one of us. I think that the shape of what that time looks like is for Contribex to determine. I think that still exists in an indeterminate state about specific time boundaries around that. I can follow up with Paris again and get, as they get specific details, share them.
Is that the pre-summit social you're referring to in her in their documentation on December 9th, 5 to 8, or is that something else?
No, I think that there's something on Monday itself during the afternoon.
Oh, okay.
But let me clarify that, because I'm not sure about that. So I guess from a high level point of view, thank you for reminding of that though. Brad, there is the unofficial meet and greet on Sunday evening from 5 to 8 at the Garage in Seattle. Just a quick show of hands, how many folks are planning to go to the Sunday evening unofficial meet and greet? Okay, well, yeah. That's fair. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. Okay, so I think the very nature of an informal meet and greet means we don't have to plan to do anything. We just show up and talk to folks. So for the quarterly planning, Paris asked if we wanted to do, how we wanted to allot our 4 hours, whether we wanted to do 2 hours in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. With the idea that the morning is more of a lecture format and the afternoon is more participation. So I figured that we could focus on doing like the most sort of SIG internally intensive work in the morning, and then do some of the sort of funner, more community facing stuff in the afternoon. So I'm sorry, to back out to the top level view, the informal meet and greet on Sunday, quarterly planning from 10 to 2, and then SIG intros and sort of SIG hellos from 2:30 onward.
So this is on the 10th. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, Monday the 10th.
I thought that I recalled, maybe I just dreamed this, or it was with regard to a totally different KubeCon, that we thought we might be prepared to help onboard in a less formal way than a sprint anybody who expressed an interest in getting involved with the docs. Bless you.
Thank you. I think that sounds like an excellent thing to do during like SIG intros or like the Monday afternoon meet and greet and hello.
Mhm.
And Brad, are events part of the Contributor Summit? Yes, they are. And do you register for that? That's a really good question for Paris. I know that in the past we've...
Yes, you do, and it's been sold out for weeks. So we will have to get Brad some sort of special dispensation.
Oh my goodness.
We will get
Brad.
it. It can be
Yes, we
got.
will.
It
Oh,
can be
thank you.
got.
Oh,
And
so
Zach
stuff.
and I both have inside tracks.
Yes,
So.
we know people.
Okay. So should I just go try and register, or I shouldn't even try and you'll just take care of it?
If you waitlist, I can mention to the people that know people that
I appreciate having friends in high places, so thank you. I will waitlist.
right. And that's a good general advice. If you're going to be there and you haven't registered for the Contributor Day, the Contributor Summit yet, please do go sign up on the wait list and then let Jennifer or myself know. All right, that is
Jennifer. What do you envision as a way of bringing people on board that's different from DocSprint?
I just was thinking something in the past when we've done doc sprints, we've tried to come up with collections of good first-time issues. We've done a fair amount of prep. We've sent out emails. We've got people to sign up. We've got, we've sent out information about the CLA. If we're not going to do a formal doc sprint, we're not going to even have a list to provide that initial information to, although I suppose that we could ask Paris or George whether there's a way of getting it posted someplace so that if people wanted to go look at information about the CLA or just point them to the contributing guide on the doc site. I'm thinking out loud. I'm just trying.
Yeah, the contributing guide is vastly expanded and improved.
Right.
So
Right.
It would be, that would be useful to point people to that.
So maybe if we can find a way through Sig Contrivex or
we can.
Yeah, just to promote that. If people are going to be at KubeCon and would like some hands-on guidance getting started from members of Sig Docs, maybe promote it that way. And then just in our back pockets, maybe have a handful of issues, but not do anything like coming up with spreadsheets and tracking and sort of the more of the mechanism of a full-on sprint. And make it clear that it would be, sort of less formal, one-on-one coaching as needed, but
right. So here's, I hesitate to say this because I don't want to do it. But here's what I think we need. I think we need a video that takes people through how to fork the repository and get your local clones. And I think we could get people through that phase in a video in 20% of the time it would take them to read through our written material. So I just put that out there in case anybody likes to work on videos and would want to do something.
I think it's a brilliant idea, Steve. Like you, I am video averse, but I also, realize that it can be a great mechanism and for this kind of thing, especially where I think it's. My recollection is that it's less intuitive than it used to be. You've actually got to push your first PR and get the CLA no sort of flag, and then you get the link that you actually need, and then everything sort of cleans up. And showing that is, I'm guessing, a lot easier for people to get than being told it. And we had people tripping over it at the Write the Docs in Cincinnati. I think everybody tripped over it except maybe one person, and I think that was Shavi.
Yeah, and at Portland, I spent almost all of my time helping people get set up instead of helping them with working on an issue.
I remember that.
And maybe on a sunshiny day, I'll find time to work on a video myself, but I don't have time in the immediate future.
Especially in these days of, sort of not particularly productive transition at Heptio. I know folks at Heptio who've got very sophisticated audio setups. If they might run to sophisticated video setups also, I shall inquire.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, yeah, that's a good idea if we can implement it. Awesome. All right, that is the end of the agenda that we have. Is there anything else that folks would like to discuss in the 10 minutes we have remaining?
There is one thing. So Andrew and I are planning to release another blog post this week about the API server. It's actually a 3-part series where we talk about the API server in general, then the implementation of the Kubernetes API and the implementation of the object store on top of etcd. And the first part of this series will heavily rely on specifying the abstract behavior of the API server without going into any implementation details. It will also heavily rely on formal specification language called Alloy. If you got the time and if you can, please do check out the blog post. We will send it around and be super critical about it. I am very curious if it's kind of an experiment, and I'm very curious if this high-level description of the behavior of the API server without actually talking about anything in concrete like resources, versions, and how the data is represented is useful for anybody to help them reason about the behavior of the system.
Interesting. Yeah, happy to give feedback on that.
I'm sorry?
I'm happy to give feedback on that.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
And likewise.
And be very critical stance is much appreciated on this one.
Sure thing. All right, last call for topics to talk about. All right, that's a SIG meeting. Thanks, everybody. Good discussion this week. See you all in China.